Hello, this is Colin Liddell, and this is the Shortpod, a brief and succinct and very occasional podcast in which I comment on the main events and issues of the day. And today it is the 3rd of May 2024. Over in the UK, they have just had major local elections. Now this is more important than normal because 2024 is also a general election year, with a general election expected sometime around November. And so these elections serve a interesting kind of bellwether function. If the Conservative Party does very badly, there might be a renewed push to replace the leader, Rishi Sunak. And if they don't do too badly, the Tories might gather around Sunak and push on to the general election in a relatively unified formation. But I think the most interesting thing to focus on is that politics doesn't always bend in the way that people think it does. There are a few interesting anomalies. Now, in addition to the council elections, the results of which are still filtering in, there was also a by-election. And the Labour Party won a parliamentary seat in Blackpool South. Now, the reason they did this was not because they greatly increased the Labour vote. The Labour vote actually went down from about 12,000 to 10,000. The reason Labour could win this seat was because the Conservative vote collapsed from, off the top of my head, I think 16,000 to about 3,000. So this apparent victory for Labour doesn't really reveal much of a groundswell for Keir Starmer's party. Another interesting detail I noticed was that Labour lost control of Oldham Council. Oldham is one of these depressing northern English towns stroke cities, which has a lot of diversity, which has a bit of a history of rape gangs, etc., etc. And here, the reason that Labour lost was because Keir Starmer is a prisoner of his pro-Israel policies. This has upset a lot of Labour voters. A lot of the Labour base is Muslim, so these people are up in arms about Keir Starmer's pro-Israel policy. Now, Keir Starmer's really tied into this because his whole basis for being leader of the Labour Party is because he was not Jeremy Corbyn. He was not a so-called anti-Semite. They managed to remove Corbyn from leadership of the Labour Party with cooked-up charges of anti-Semitism. Keir Starmer was going to be completely the opposite of that, and so he can't really support the kind of Palestinian or the pro-Palestinian side. He has to be more of a kind of mainstream deep state kind of character. And that doesn't really work well with the Labour grassroots, especially the Labour Muslim grassroots in places like Oldham. Now, my view is that the whole Gaza thing, it's probably kicked off by the Russians. The Russians are in communication with Iran and Hamas kind of called the shots together. And this was designed to benefit Putin in various ways by splitting the Democrat coalition in the United States. But in Britain, it's had quite the opposite effect because instead it's sort of impacting on the Labour coalition. So this just shows you that politics is full of all sorts of complexities. It doesn't always bend in the way that you think it does. Now, another thing is the Tory vote is suffering at the moment because of this party called Reform UK. Reform UK, to me, it looks like a fake party. Nigel Farage looks like a fake politician. They are boosted by a fake political news channel called GB News. The money for GB News, they lose about £30 million a year. That money seems to come from somebody with business ties to Vladimir Putin. So the whole thing looks very dodgy. A lot of dark money involved, a lot of suspicious goings on. I don't think Reform will really feature in the British general election. At the moment, they seem to be picking up about 14 or 15% in the polls, pulling the Tories down to about 20% in the polls. Come the general election, I think you'll see the Reform vote evaporate, especially if the Tories stay quite hard on the anti-immigration policies that they're pushing, their so-called Rwanda plan. Now, the other thing is Labour look big and scary and almost definite to win the British general election. I think they're somewhere in the region of 45% of the vote at the moment. They're like 20 points above the Tories. It looks like an impossible gap to close, but I think the Starmer bubble's quite a soft bubble. The Labour Party can't really offer the British voters anything except a change of party. Their hands are tied by budgetary constraints, etc. And they're going to be a bit soft on immigration. Everybody knows that. The British voter base, I think a lot of them really do want harder immigration policies. Multicultural Britain is becoming a kind of slow burn, chaotic society, and people are feeling a bit edgy. Also, a lot of political populism has been pumped into the system over the years, sometimes by foreign agents and sometimes by kind of indigenous sources. And so whether it's justified or not, that's a completely different question. The British people are attracted to those kinds of policies. So I think the Tories do have a path to victory if they keep a competitive edge on immigration. And, with Rishi Sunak fronting that, a brown man fronting this kind of hard right populism, then they'll have an edge with which to puncture the soft Starmerite bubble. And so the British general election won't be as one-sided as a lot of pundits and analysts think. The only question is, in the aftermath of the council elections, will the Tory party lapse into a bout of infighting and backstabbing? We'll see. Over and out.